Please, Martha, forgive me. I was blind. I didn't know what I had until I lost it. Those words trembled from Henry's mouth as he knelt on the cold floor of our old house, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. His hands shook as he tried to reach for mine, but I stepped back. For the first time in my life, I saw fear, not pride, in his eyes. The same man who once shouted at me, insulted me, and made me cry every night was now the one begging for my forgiveness. I looked at him, my heart pounding like a drum, torn between anger and pity. The house was quiet, except for the sound of his sobs and the ticking clock on the wall. Outside, rain fell heavily, washing the dust off the street, as if heaven itself was cleansing the pain of years gone by. But it wasn't always like this. Once, Henry was the man I loved, the man who held my hand through storms. And I was the woman who believed love could fix anything. If only I knew that love alone wasn't enough. That night, as lightning flashed through the window, I took a deep breath and whispered, "You made me cry every night, Henry. Now it's your turn to feel what pain tastes like." His eyes widened, filled with regret. And just as he opened his mouth to speak again, there was a loud knock on the door. Bang! 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 The sound echoed through the room like thunder. Henry froze. My heart skipped. I turned slowly toward the door, wondering if the past had finally come back for him. It all began 12 years ago, when Henry and I moved into that same small house on Willow Street. Back then, life was simple. He had just started his carpentry business, and I sold handmade soaps at the local market. We were not rich, but we were happy, or so I thought. Henry used to smile a lot then. He would bring me flowers from the roadside and say, "Martha, one day, I'll build you the biggest shop in town." I believed him because love made me believe anything he said. But slowly things began to change. The business started to grow, and with it, Henry's pride. He got new friends, men who drank too much, bragged too loud, and laughed at people like me. At first, I thought it was harmless. But soon, those men became his world, and I became his shadow. He started coming home late. Some nights, he didn't come home at all. When I asked, he would say, "Stop nagging, Martha. You don't understand business." I tried to smile through it. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house clean, prayed for him, and told myself it was just a phase. But the more I loved him, the colder he became. Then came the shouting. He would shout at me for every small thing. The food being too hot, the floor not clean enough, the curtains being too old. I would stand quietly, holding my tears until he left the room. Sometimes, when he slammed the door, I would sit by the window and cry into my hands, praying that one day he would see how much I was hurting. But the nights were the worst. He would come home drunk, his breath smelling of whiskey and regret. He'd stumble around the room, mumbling things I couldn't understand. And if I said anything, even a whisper, he would explode. One night, he broke the vase my mother gave me on our wedding day. He didn't even apologize. He just walked out and slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I sat on the floor beside the broken pieces, my tears mixing with the dust, wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like. Yet every morning, I still made him breakfast. I still ironed his shirts. I still told myself he would change. Because that's what good wives did. At least that's what my mother always said. But Henry didn't change. He got worse. One evening, I was at the market selling soaps when I overheard two women talking. "You know Henry the carpenter?" one of them said. "He's been seen with that woman from the hardware store, always together after hours." My heart stopped. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. I went home that night, cooked dinner, and waited for him. He came home late again, smelling of cheap perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked, he laughed. "You're jealous of my business partners now?" That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between my tears. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew wider than the ocean. Then came the day that changed everything. Henry came home angry. He said a deal went wrong and blamed me for bringing him bad luck. He shouted until the neighbors could hear. When I tried to calm him, he pushed me so hard I fell. For a moment, the world went silent. I saw the man I loved standing over me, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with rage. He stormed out, leaving me on the floor. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it had cracked in two. That night, I cried until my voice broke. But something inside me also changed. I decided I would never let him make me feel that small again. The next morning, I went to my friend Clara's house. She was the only one who knew the truth about my marriage. She looked at me, saw the bruise on my arm and said, "Martha, it's time you stand up for yourself. You've suffered enough." Her words stayed in my heart. That was the day I started to plan, not for revenge, but for peace. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't live like that forever. Weeks later, Henry's business started to fall apart. One of his partners ran away with the money. His workers quit. The same friends who drank with him disappeared when he had nothing left to offer. And suddenly he was the one coming home early. The one sitting alone, staring at the floor. The one trying to talk to me. But I had nothing left to say. I had already packed my things. When he saw the bags, his voice trembled for the first time in years. "Martha, please don't go." I looked at him, my eyes cold but calm. "You made me cry every night, Henry. Now it's your turn to live with the silence you gave me." And with that I walked out, but that was just the beginning. Because the knock on the door that rainy night, years later, was not from me. It was from someone who came to make Henry face the rest of the consequences. The kind he couldn't beg his way out of. The sound of the knock echoed through the house again, louder this time. Bang! 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 Henry's body stiffened. His trembling hands gripped the edge of the table, as if he was holding on for dear life. His face had lost all color. I could see it in his eyes, fear. The same fear I used to feel every night when he shouted at me. Who could that be?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my eyes toward the door. The knocks grew faster, more impatient. Rain poured outside, lightning flashing across the sky like a warning. For a moment, I wondered if it was karma itself standing at the door, ready to collect what it was owed. Finally, I stepped forward and slowly opened it. Standing in the doorway was a tall young man, drenched from the rain. His clothes were soaked, his hair dripping, but his eyes burned with fury. "Are you Henry Morgan?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. Henry hesitated. "Who wants to know?" The young man stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You ruined my father's business. You destroyed our family." Henry's mouth dropped open. "What are you talking about?" The man clenched his jaw. "You remember Mr. Daniels, don't you? The man who trusted you with his savings to build that workshop 12 years ago? The one you cheated and left broke? That man was my father. He died because of what you did." I gasped. I had never heard that story before. I turned to Henry, but he couldn't meet my eyes. His face was pale, his body shaking. I didn't mean for that to happen," Henry stammered. "It was just business." "Business?" the young man cut in. "You call destroying a man's life business? My mother cried herself to sleep for years. And now you stand here asking for forgiveness." The young man's words sliced through the room like a blade. I felt a chill run through me. For once, Henry didn't have a comeback. He stood frozen. The proud man I once knew now reduced to silence. "Please," Henry said weakly. "I was wrong. I've paid for my mistakes." The man stepped closer, anger burning in his eyes. "You think begging makes it right?" I could feel the tension growing heavier, like thunder before a storm. I gently stepped between them. "Please," I said softly. "There's been enough pain for one night. Let the past rest." The young man's face softened slightly when he looked at me. His eyes were full of pain, not just anger. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't come to hurt anyone. I needed to see him. I needed to know if he still slept peacefully after everything he did." I looked at Henry, who now sat on the couch with his head in his hands, shaking. "He doesn't sleep peacefully anymore," I said. "He's haunted by what he's done. Every night." The young man nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's his punishment." He turned and walked away into the rain, his shadow fading into the darkness. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Henry sat motionless, tears running down his face. I stood beside the window, watching the rain fall, my heart heavy with memories. Was it true? I finally asked. What he said about Mr. Daniels? Henry didn't look up. Yes, he whispered. I took the man's money. I thought I was being smart, growing my business fast. But when everything collapsed, I didn't even go back to explain. He lost everything because of me. I stared at him in disbelief. And you never told me? I was ashamed, he said quietly. I didn't want you to see what kind of man I really was. A long silence filled the room. I had no words left. The man who once made me cry every night wasn't just cruel to me. He was cruel to others too. It was strange, watching him now. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't proud. He was just a broken old man, haunted by ghosts he created himself. I turned away, wiping a tear from my eye. I didn't want him to see me cry again, not out of love, but out of sorrow for the wasted years. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain against the window reminded me of the nights I used to cry alone. But this time, the crying came from the other side of the room. Henry was sitting in the dark, whispering prayers under his breath. I could barely hear the words, but I knew what they were. He was begging for forgiveness, for peace, for one more chance to make things right. The next morning, I found him sitting at the table, holding a small wooden box. His hands were trembling as he opened it. Inside were letters old, yellowed with age. These were the letters I never sent, he said, his voice low. Letters to you, to Mr. Daniels, to everyone I hurt. I wrote them, but I never had the courage to deliver them. He handed me one, addressed to me. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were the words, Martha, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. Every tear you cried became a stone on my heart. I thought I was strong, but I was weak. I thought I was a man, but I was a coward. If there's still a piece of you that remembers the man I used to be, please pray for me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. My voice was calm, but inside, my heart ached. Henry, I said softly, forgiveness is not something you can beg for. It's something you earn. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his tired eyes. Then tell me what I must do. Before I could answer, we heard another sound outside. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was the sound of a car pulling up, and voices. I moved to the window. 2 men were stepping out, both in suits, both carrying documents. Henry looked at me confused. Who are they? I turned to him, my stomach tightening. It looks like the past isn't done with you yet. As the men approached the door, Henry's hands began to shake again. And when the first man knocked, 3 slow, heavy knocks, I knew this was something far bigger than either of us expected. The knocking at the door was steady and firm, not like the angry pounding from before. Knock, knock, knock. Henry looked at me with fear in his eyes, his breath uneven. Martha, he whispered, please don't open it. But I couldn't ignore it. Something in my heart told me that whoever stood behind that door carried another piece of his past. The part he'd been running from all these years. I took a deep breath and turned the handle. Standing outside were 2 men dressed in dark suits, their clothes spotless despite the rain. One was tall, with a serious face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The other held a brown envelope and a clipboard. Good evening, the tall man said, his voice calm but firm. We're looking for Mr. Henry Morgan. Henry froze in his seat. That's me, he said weakly. The man nodded and stepped inside. I'm Officer Clark from the State Financial Investigation Department. This is my partner, Mr. Davies. We have a few questions regarding a case we've reopened. A case? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. What kind of case? Clark looked at Henry. It concerns fraudulent transactions connected to the Willow Street development project 12 years ago. You were one of the investors, correct? Henry swallowed hard. Yes, but that was a long time ago. I already lost everything. The officer's expression didn't change. Perhaps. But we've recently discovered that one of the accounts used in that project was registered in your name, and funds from that account were traced to several offshore deposits. My heart skipped. Offshore deposits? I turned to Henry, but his eyes avoided mine. Mr. Morgan, Clark continued, we have a warrant to search the premises and confiscate any documents related to that account. Henry's voice broke. No, please, you don't understand. I didn't take that money. The officer looked at him sharply. Then who did? Henry's lips trembled. It was my partner, George. He convinced me to sign some papers. I thought it was a loan for the business. I didn't know he'd use my name to hide stolen funds. Mr. Davies opened the envelope and took out a photo. Is this the man you're referring to? Henry looked at it, and his shoulders dropped. Yes, that's him. Clark exchanged a quick glance with his partner. Mr. George Hopkins died 2 months ago. Before his death, he left a written statement claiming you were fully aware of every transaction. That's why we're here. Henry's mouth fell open. No, that's a lie. He was the thief, not me. The officers remained silent for a moment. Then Clark spoke again, his voice calm but heavy. We're not here to judge you, Mr. Morgan. But you'll need to come with us for questioning. If you truly are innocent, you'll have your chance to prove it. Henry's knees buckled slightly. He looked at me, eyes full of fear and desperation. The same man who once thought himself untouchable, now shaking like a leaf in the wind. Martha, he whispered. Please, tell them I'm not that man anymore. I looked at him long and hard. So many emotions rushed through me, anger, pity, exhaustion. I remembered every night I cried, every word he threw at me, every bruise that faded with time but not with memory. Officer, I said quietly, my husband has done many wrong things. I don't know what happened 12 years ago, but I know one thing. Every secret eventually comes to light. Clark nodded slightly. You're a wise woman, ma'am. Henry reached for me, but I stepped back. I'll come back, Martha, he said desperately. I promise. I'll fix this. You'll see. But I didn't answer. I just stood there as they let him out into the rain, his hands shaking as the cold drops hit his face. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt heavier than ever. The house seemed too big, too quiet. I walked slowly to the table and saw the wooden box he had left open. The letters were still inside, but beneath them was something I hadn't noticed before, a small key tied to a faded red ribbon. I picked it up and stared at it. On the back of the key, tiny letters were engraved. Storage 47B. My heart started to race. Storage? What was he hiding? I looked toward the window, where the police car's red and blue lights flashed faintly in the rain as it drove away. Henry was gone for now. But I knew this wasn't the end. Something told me that the truth he was so afraid of was still buried somewhere. And that little key in my hand was the beginning of it. I held it tightly and whispered to myself, Henry, you might be gone tonight, but your secrets won't stay buried forever. The rain outside grew heavier, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I placed the key in my pocket, blew out the candle on the table, and walked toward the door, determined to find out what Henry had been hiding all these years. But as I reached for my coat, I heard something soft, distant, but unmistakable. Someone was outside, watching the house. I froze. The shadow moved across the window. When I turned on the porch light, there was no one there, but a wet footprint on the porch told me I wasn't alone. Weeks passed after that night, but the storm that began in my house refused to settle. Every day felt like walking through the echoes of a life I once knew. A life that had finally fallen apart. Henry was taken in for questioning. The town buzzed with gossip. Some said he would never come out of it. Others pitied him, saying karma had finally come home to rest. I didn't speak much to anyone. My days became quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like healing. One morning, I finally decided to follow the trail of the key. Storage 47B. It led me to an old warehouse on the edge of town. Dusty, dim, forgotten. The man at the counter checked the number and nodded. Yes, that box has been here for years. Belongs to a Mr. Henry Morgan. My hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the metal door. Inside, there were only 2 wooden chests covered with cobwebs and a small folder resting on top. I opened the folder and found papers, property documents, business receipts, and to my surprise, my name written on several of them. Henry had bought land in my name. He had even set up a small savings account for me. At the bottom was a letter. Martha, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally caught up with me. I kept these things hidden not out of greed, but because I wanted you to have something safe when I was gone. I know I hurt you beyond repair. I made you cry, belittled your worth, and failed as a husband. But please know this. Every tear you shed became the reason I tried to be better, even when I failed again. I don't expect your forgiveness. I only hope that when you look at what I've left, you'll see not a monster, but a man who finally learned too late what love truly means. My heart sank. I sat on the cold floor, holding that letter, and for the first time I cried, not out of pain, but out of release. Henry was not a good man, but he was a man who faced his downfall. And in the end, that was his punishment, living long enough to feel the weight of every tear he caused. A week later, I received a call from the station. Henry's heart had given out during questioning. They said he went peacefully, holding a small wooden cross in his hand. When I went to see him one last time, I whispered, "You made me cry every night, Henry, but tonight, I forgive you." The words didn't erase the scars. They didn't make the past beautiful, but they freed me. I used the money he left to open a small shelter for women. A place where broken hearts could heal, and where no one would ever have to cry alone again. I called it the Willow Home, named after the street where my tears had once fallen, and where my strength had grown. Every evening, I sit by the window as the sun sets, listening to the laughter of the women and children in the shelter. Sometimes, when the wind blows softly, I can almost hear Henry's voice whisper through it. Not in anger this time, but in peace. And I smile, because life has a way of turning pain into purpose. And though he once made me cry every night, now every tear I shed has bloomed into forgiveness.